Taxes in Malaysia. Let's be honest, for a lot of us, it can be a real headache once a year. But what happens when that little headache turns into a massive migraine? Tax law can seem super confusing, but there's one thing that's totally clear. You absolutely have to understand the consequences of getting it wrong. And that applies to every single taxpayer out there.
So, let's just cut to the chase. What really happens if you mess up your taxes? I'm not just talking about the paperwork or the deadlines. What are the actual, real-world consequences if you make an honest mistake? Or, if someone deliberately tries to play the system? That's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
We're going to start by looking at the two different roads a penalty can go down. And trust me, the destinations are worlds apart. Then we'll get into the most common mistakes people make, what happens if your numbers don't add up, and the special rules for businesses. And finally, we'll look at the really serious stuff before we get to the one big takeaway you need to remember from all of this.
All right, first things first, let's get our heads around the penalty system itself. In Malaysia, if you commit a tax offense, the authorities basically have two options, and which path they choose makes a huge difference for you.
Okay, so on one side, you have penalties without prosecution. You can think of this like a really, really serious ticket. It's an administrative thing. It's going to cost you for sure, but it stays out of the courts. But on the other side, you have with prosecution. Now we're talking about a formal court case. The stakes are way, way higher, with the possibility of massive fines and even jail time.
So, let's talk about the most common issues, the things that trip most people up. We're not talking about some kind of master criminal plan here. We're talking about something as simple as just not filing your tax return on time. It might feel like a minor slip-up, but you're about to see how quickly things can escalate.
So the system kind of looks at this in two stages. First, there's failing to file your return, just that one time. Hey, it happens. But then there's failing to file more than twice. And that's when they start looking at you very differently. Being a repeat offender is a big deal to the tax authorities.
And just look at the jump in penalties here. If you failed to file for the first time and get prosecuted, you're looking at a fine up to 2,000 ringgit. But if you do it more than twice, that potential fine skyrockets to 20,000 ringgit, and you get hit with an extra penalty of 3 times the tax you owed. The message is pretty loud and clear, right? Don't make a habit of this. Okay, so that's what happens if you don't file. But what if you do file and the numbers are just wrong? Maybe you forgot some income, or maybe you just put in the wrong information. This is a whole other major category of tax offenses.
The key number to burn into your brain here is 2. 2 times. If you get prosecuted for an incorrect return, the penalty is a whopping 200% or double the amount of tax you tried to avoid paying. That is a very, very heavy price for a mistake.
Let's just break that down. Without a court case, you're already facing a penalty equal to 100% of the tax you underpaid. That's rough. But if it goes to court, that penalty doubles to 200% plus you get a fine of up to 10,000 ringgit. It's an incredibly expensive error to make. Okay, let's switch gears for a second. If you're an employer, a director, or maybe you work in HR or finance, listen up because this next bit is especially for you. The law puts a pretty heavy burden on companies to get their tax stuff right. Employers have a whole checklist of duties. You've got to tell the Inland Revenue Board, or IRB, when people start, when they leave, and especially if they're about to leave the country. You also have to give your employees their Form EA every year and submit a complete return for everyone who works for you. And what happens if you drop the ball on any of that? Well, the standard penalty is a fine that can go all the way up to 20,000 ringgit, or even 6 months in prison. That's the baseline, and it's already pretty serious.
And the list goes on. Employers have to handle the monthly tax deduction scheme, what we call PCB, and follow any specific instructions to deduct tax or hold back money from an employee's final paycheck. There are a lot of boxes to tick.
And the penalty for messing these up? Yep, it's exactly the same. They're making a point with this repetition. The message is we take all of these employer duties very, very seriously, and the consequences for failing are consistent and severe.
All right, we're now moving into the most serious territory. We're not talking about simple mistakes or forgetting paperwork anymore. Now we're talking about willful, deliberate tax fraud. This is the red line you really, really don't want to cross.
This chart shows you just how serious the financial hit can be. Willful evasion? Huge penalty. But just look at that bar on the far right for BEPS non-compliance. What's BEPS? Well, in simple terms, it's a set of international rules to stop big multinational companies from shifting their profits around to avoid taxes. And as you can see, getting that wrong can lead to a fine of up to 100,000 ringgit. Wow. And it's not just about the money at this stage. For willful evasion, you're facing up to 3 years in jail, on top of the fine and that 3 times tax penalty. Even just helping someone else to evade tax could land you in prison for 3 years. These aren't just fines anymore. They are serious criminal charges that can change your life forever.
So, after going through all of these fines, penalties, and even potential prison sentences, what's the bottom line? What's the one thing you really need to take away from all this?
It all boils down to this one simple truth. The cost of doing things the right way, of being compliant, of getting help if you need it, is always, always cheaper than facing the consequences of getting it wrong. I mean, from a simple late filing all the way to a major crime, it's not even a contest. Being compliant wins every time.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. Now that you've seen the numbers, now that you know the very risks involved, from thousands of ringgit in fines all the way to years of your life behind bars, you just have to ask yourself, is it really worth the gamble?